In August of 2017, I made the video Courage Duping in Crypt of the Necrodancer. That video talked about the way Ring of Courage could be used to get high scores on the character Bard, including a couple of realistic setups to help you get into the 30,000s. When I released that video, the top 10 for Bard score looked like this. The highest anyone thought you could get without any duping was around 30,000, maybe a couple thousand higher on a really rare seed. Cancel made the first Courage duping world record at high 33,000, and I had been refining the setup and made a much stronger score a few days later with over 44,000 gold. It is now 2021, and the top 10 for Bard score looks like this. That's right, these are all 6-digit numbers, and a 209,000 gold gets you, or me, 10th. Ochre leads the pack with 388,000 gold, and she has gotten over 380,000 twice. There are a lot of developments that went into these improvements. There are ways to get the build more efficiently. There are a couple of Bard-specific ways to combat health loss. We now have the concepts of a doved pawnbroker or a delayed leprechaun. But really, these numbers are a realization of the tech in the earlier Courage duping video. It's had a few years to mature, and so the results are taken much closer to their limit. What's more, the top 5 for Cadence score looks like this. In fact, of the 8 characters that get Ring of Courage, 7 of them have a Courage duping world record. There's one extra bit of tech needed to Courage dupe on characters besides Bard. This video will talk in brief about that. But Ring of Courage is not the reason I'm making a new video about duping. On January 5th of 2021, we found a way to dupe gold without Ring of Courage. We, in this case, is specifically a Discord theorycraft group of Ochre, Creamy, Lith, and myself. This is the new, updated video on duping in Crypt of the Necrodancer. When you hit a key in this game, it'll search for what beat your input best matches. For Bard, this is trivial because your input causes the beat. But for the other 13 characters, it requires looking in the beat map. It finds the closest match. If the closest match is in the past, you gave a late beat input, and if the closest match is in the future, you gave an early beat input. You can picture this on a piano roll. The lines in the middle of each box are the actual timing of the beat, but inputs you give anywhere in the box count, so it can be up to half a beat early or half a beat late. In Necrodancer, the whole world is moving to the beat and not just you. It turns out if you act early beat, the monsters and traps move on the white line perfectly on the beat. But if you move on the white line or anytime late beat, the monsters and traps move on the frame after you. The game tries to run at 60 frames per second, so it's a split second later, but it is an important split second. Note that for Bard, since you define the beat, it's always as if you moved on the white line, so everything always moves one frame after you on Bard. And for completeness, if you skip a beat completely, the enemies wait until the very last frame of the beat and then they move. Think of it like they are making fully sure you aren't going to give an input. Anyway, a few details of this game are not tied to the beat. These are mostly niche animation timing things, but they can affect gameplay. The most important one for this video, you can only pick up one object, be it an item or a pile of gold, per frame. So with that in mind, let's revisit Courage duping from the previous video. With Ring of Courage, you move on your attack frame. On this frame, you collect the gold already on that tile, and then the game deletes it and computes how much gold belongs there. It computes it wrong because it doesn't know you already picked it up, and so it puts the sum of the old and the new gold down. You can't collect that gold on this frame because you've already collected gold on the frame, so if you're still on the tile next frame, you collect it then. But, as the previous video showed, bounce traps and enemies allow you to pick up only the first copy and leave the second behind. This works because everything on Bard acts on the next frame, so no matter what the animation looks like, you spend only a single frame of game logic standing on that gold, and skip collecting the second copy. This helps you repeat it over and over with every enemy on the floor and achieve quadratic growth on the gold pile. For characters with a beat map, everything acts either on the beat or the frame after you. To get this pile-preserving behavior for them, you need to be sure that your input is late beat. If it is early beat, there are still more frames while you're standing on that gold before enemies and traps move, and during the first of those frames, you will collect the rest of the gold. This is what is known as a sub-beat error in Courage runs. For all the characters besides Bard, the current state of the meta is to get a full leprechaun on the bounce trap and dupe it as many times as you can using body blocks before the song runs out. Since you only get one leprechaun in a run, a sub-beat error is pretty much doom. Even with that added challenge though, repeatedly Courage duping a leprechaun has been done successfully on lots of different characters. Even Arya. Well, that's a quick recap of the past few years, and it brings us up to Tuesday. On Tuesday, Ochre307, the Bard Score world record holder, was messing around with Warlocks, trying to find a more consistent way to make them useful in score, because if you have a Courage weapon, the Warlock teleports you and cancels out your Courage dash, and so you can't dupe them, or so we thought. What she found was the following. Rifle Courage firing at a Warlock at point-blank range while the Warlock is standing on gold. Dupes the pile the Warlock is standing on. At first, we were trying to understand how this made any sense, because you don't Courage onto that gold. Teleport already gets rid of your Courage dash, but it isn't the Courage dash that's causing the dupe, it's the recoil. Creamy quickly confirmed that the same happens if you get rid of Courage Ring, and so we had done our first ever dupe without Courage Ring, using just rifle recoil. Now, why does this work? Well, on the player frame, you shoot the gun, the Warlock teleports you immediately, and it exchanges your tile and its tile. That moves the gold back to where you started, and you recoil onto that gold tile. You collect the gold on your own player frame, and then the game updates the value to reflect the Warlock kill. The same bug happens, and so the next frame you collect a pile that has your gold from the Warlock kill and the original gold, and you have grabbed that same pile of gold onto the Warlock twice. Fundamentally, this has a key property in common with Courage duping. You're collecting a gold pile during the frame that it updates. Lith was the next person to have a breakthrough discovery. Using a wire, she found you can again cause gold to be formed on a tile you move into. One way uses gun recoil, and another uses a cat o' nine tails and a Warlock. She was working specifically on trying to find a realistic way for Tempo to dupe a Leprechaun, because Tempo gets these weapons, but Tempo does not get Courage. It was deemed too strong for a character with infinite damage. So in all of these cases, you first collect the pile on the player frame, and then you collect the new pile on the enemy frame. So all the ways that Courage duping provided to make the enemies or the traps move you off the pile, they theoretically still work here. You'll have the same subbeat restriction if you're going for it on Tempo, but it can be repeated. And here's an example of Tempo duping a Leprechaun pile more than once. But we weren't finished yet. I particularly still wanted to see whether this new generalized duping could apply to characters that don't get weapons like Eli or Melody. Neither of them have a way to move during the player's frame into some fresh generated gold. If Melody kills with her loot and then bounces onto the pile, she ends player frame on the bounce trap and doesn't get to the gold until enemy frame. By that point, it's already updated correctly, so you can't dupe. It fails similarly if Eli kills something with a spell and then gets wind pulled onto the gold. To achieve a dupe, you have to move onto the pile on the frame that it is being updated, not the next frame. So maybe the way that we were supposed to solve this problem is to update a pile of gold on enemy frame. Enter Rat Familiar. Rat Familiar is always active when it's deployed every frame, and it can deal damage either by your motion moving it onto things or by enemies moving onto it. If an enemy moves onto your Rat Familiar, that gold that it drops is generated during enemy frame. That let us set up the first ever Eli dupe. At the end of player frame here, Eli stands on the bounce trap, and then during enemy frame, first the skeleton moves onto the rat and dies, and then Eli bounces into the gold because traps move after enemies. By being on a gold pile during the frame it updates, you collect the original value on the enemy frame and then the updated value on the next frame. This is a genuine dupe on Eli with just the Rat Familiar. Golden Loot is also able to generate gold on enemy frames since it acts during movement, and so enemies make you move. That enemy's movement causes you to generate gold. If you go back to a bounce trap setup before and just change it to be a wind mage pulling you, then it works, and you actually get a dupe. You get more gold on the example on the right with a wind mage pulling you onto the trap than you do on the example on the left where you've moved onto the trap. The difference is on which frame the slime is getting killed. On the left, it is killed on player frame, and so the gold's updated correctly by the time you get there. But on the right, it's generated on enemy frame, and so it's doing the exact same process where you are on a gold pile as it updates, and that's a dupe. Enemy frame dupes have a few other situations that they can come in. You can use Boots of Pain or Boots of Lunging to deal damage if you get moved on enemy frame. We found a few really obscure setups. Here's one with Cutlass and multi-parry and Pain Boots. We also found some player frame dupes that are rather niche. We have ice slides that move you exactly on the middle of the beat. If you give a frame perfect input, you can deal damage and slide onto the gold and use, say, Fireball as a move attack weapon similar to a Ring of Courage. but it has to be frame perfect, and the enemy that you hit has to have bounced into the tile it's on, otherwise it will stop you from sliding. There are probably even crazier setups out there to discover, but we moved on to the challenge of keeping a copy of the pile around in an enemy frame dupe. For enemy frame dupes, there isn't a way to be pulled or pushed off the gold, since you need to be on the pile when the enemy frame ends, and when enemy frame ends, all the things that pull and push you are done. If you get pulled and pushed off, you just don't pick up any gold. Here's an example of that. So, if you are on the pile at the end of enemy frame, what can move you on the frame after that? Well, remember earlier I mentioned that if you don't give inputs, then enemy frame is the last frame of the beat? In theory, when that happens, you can give an input on the following frame. It'll be valid. It'll be an input for the following beat. And if it's frame perfect, you use it to jump off of the gold before it's collected. So you get your gold from the enemy frame, but you leave it during your own frame and cause it to only collect one pile, leaving the other behind. Now, obviously, this is very difficult because it's frame perfect, but it's not that terribly inconsistent, and I was able to do it a few times, even a few times in a row. Anytime that the enemy frame dupe can be done without you doing anything at all, it's a single frame perfect input after the enemy's act. If you want to be even more masochistic, you can have 2 frame perfect inputs 2 frames apart, where you act and then the enemies act and then you act again. This one I found horribly inconsistent, largely due to the game's inconsistent frame rate, so that it can keep the music accurate. Even with the heart transplant active, the 2 frames apart inputs was just not something I was able to pull off more than once in like 30 minutes of trying. At the very least, though, it seems pretty reasonable to get 1 or 2 frame perfect exits when the enemy frame is the last frame of the beat. And my near-term goal is to get an Eli score world record that uses duping. I already have a clip of getting a full Leprechaun dupe and an all zones run, but it was a little bit short of my PB because the seed wasn't ideal. Overall, we know a lot more about duping than we did last week, and definitely more than we knew back in 2017 when the first video was released. There are quite a few mechanisms in Necrodancer to end up on a gold pile during the frame it updates, and for everyone you can dream up, there might just be a way to exploit it. There's still no infinite gold because there's no infinite source of gold dropping enemies required to be able to update a gold pile at all. But the gears are really turning and making 2021 an exciting year to be breaking Necrodancer score running. With these techniques, the list of dupable characters grows to 11. We have everyone on this list now except Dove, Monk, and Coda. I look forward to a few years from now when we can compare the leaderboards to see how much closer to the limits we get. Thanks for watching.